And this was a partnership with Reconciliation Canada, and it was in Duncan with the Cowichan elders. And let's see, is this the same one? No, no, this is actually, yes, that was it. And so this is they had a full house for this event. A lot of people are coming to these events because they're curious, but what we find too is that settlers who are familiar with their public library, who've been coming here for years, they tend to feel quite comfortable in the space. And so we suspect that a lot more people are coming to these types of events when the library is a partner, or if it's held in the library, than perhaps if it was in an unfamiliar place. Certainly when we held our event at the public library, we found that we had an unprecedented attendance. So this one is the Seashell Public Library. And they had over 100 people packed into their little library for the Sayaya Grassroots Reconciliation Movement on the Sunshine Coast. And this was an event to bring people together to learn about each other and start moving towards reconciliation. They've had a number of programs. It's a joint initiative between Indigenous and non-Indigenous residents, offering a local response to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and inspired by and dedicated to the survivors of Indian residential schools, including day scholars. The goal of the Sayaya movement is to create collaborative projects that build relationships and dialogue on the journey towards reconciliation. And this movement has really taken off. You'll see later on in this webinar one of the projects that they've done around weaving. And so this is just getting everyone in the community together to hear Indigenous people tell their truth, their history, their experience of living in the community, and to share part of their culture and start building bridges of familiarity and understanding and friendship. Okay, so this is an event that our library spearheaded, and it is very much built upon the large events that all the other libraries I've mentioned have done. So thanks again to all of those libraries. We couldn't have done it without you inventing the wheel. And this project, Truth and Reconciliation in our community, it's the biggest project we've ever done. It took us a year and a half to plan and organize and find funding for and build relationships to get all of the partners involved. And we ended up with 15 community partners. Was it worth it? Absolutely. I think it's probably the most important thing that our library has ever done. So this it started off as wanting to bring the community together in a safe place to have a conversation around the reality of the Wet'suwet'en people living in this area, and to start to share truths and personal experiences around that to forge a better understanding between everyone in our community. And I think we definitely got off to a good start in that area. We're a very small library. We had 150 people attend this event, and we're in a town of 5,400 people. And we also it's been a goal of ours to try to engage the Indigenous community with the library to a greater extent. And at this event, at least 50% of the 150 plus attendees were Indigenous, which we've never seen anything like that at any of our events. And so I think this was a very, very important thing that we did here. So what it looks like for us was we divided the day into sections. It was 4 hours long. It was supposed to be 3 hours long, and it went to 4. because it just went very organically. And we had different people come up and talk about what it's like to live in this community today as an Indigenous person, tell their experiences, what it was like growing up, what it was like in the past. We had two instructors from the Aboriginal Education Council come and do a wonderful exercise, which was a bead timeline, and they went through thousands of years of Wet'suwet'en history on this land, with a visual representation using a string of beads showing just how long the people have been here and what things had happened on this land, right up until the present day. And it was very powerful to see. At one point near the end, they had this string strung out that was probably about 20 feet long, covered in beads marking his milestones in history on this land, and only the last 12 inches were during the time that it's being settled by non-Wet'suwet'en people. And it made a huge impression on people and was very, very enlightening. So then we also had traditional drumming and dancing. You can see some of the drummers from Ekia Huxley drum and dance troupe up in the top there, and some very inspirational speakers. There's Mel Basil in the upper right-hand corner, gave a very enlightening talk about the need to unlearn. And that's not, he spoke about not only needing for settlers to unlearn their perception of Canada, but also for him as an individual to have to unlearn other people's perceptions of him and to have to learn all about his culture. And all in all, when at the end of the day, when people gave their written feedback to us, they had comments for us like, I've lived here for 37 years, and I had never heard about any of this. I never knew about the history of the Wet'suwet'en in the Smithers area. I'd never heard of residential schools. Thank you so much. I really need to know this. Everyone needs to know this. And one of the elders who was there spoke, saying that today was a real day of healing, and there was a lot of healing going on. So it was a very, very good start. And for the library, the relationships that we carefully, slowly built over that year and a half to make this event happen, to get all these different partners involved, have really borne a lot of fruit for us since then. In now we consult each other on ideas that we have, collections we want to create, program ideas, event ideas, and we frequently partner with each other. And many new events and partnerships have been born of the relationships that went into this event. A lot of libraries are also celebrating or I should say observing Orange Shirt Day. They're doing it in various ways. Some are wearing orange shirts, some are showing movies and discussing them. Some are having book clubs about residential schools and discussion groups. And here in Smithers, we showed The Secret Path, and it was facilitated by a local Wet'suwet'en woman afterwards, who just was a marvelous facilitator, and everyone had a very insightful discussion afterwards. There's also the aspect of wanting to honor and support the traditional languages in libraries, and this has been done in a number of ways. Some libraries, when they're building new branches, are going to the local First Nations to ask their advice on a name, saying, what is this place called in the language, or do you have a suggestion of what we should name this place? There's the Natsamast branch in Strathcona of the Vancouver Public Library, and that's in the Musqueam language. There is the Swanghuangtuhu I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm trying. In what is known as James Bay, that's a Greater Victoria Public Library branch. There's the Huihui Library, which is an Indigenous library on the UBC campus and research center. And I hope that anyone who ever goes looking for information on Indigenous matters will contact them, because they are the experts for sure. And another way that people are supporting the language in libraries is by holding language workshops. We've held several with an elder and Wet'suwet'en speaker at the Smithers Library, and they're always very popular. We also link to First Voices database. I notice a lot of libraries are promoting First Voices, and this database has many Indigenous languages, and you can learn words, hear stories, hear songs. It's an excellent resource, and I really urge everyone to check it out. And there's also a very interesting local initiative that is done by the mayor of Smithers and Dolores Alfred from the Wet'suwet'en Nation. And we can't take any credit for it, but because libraries share information, we retweet their Facebook posts, and all of our followers on Facebook are really enjoying seeing these posts. And this is once a week. Dolores Alfred will go visit the mayor and teach him a word or a phrase of the week. And she's been doing this for years. But a couple of years ago, they started taking it to the street. So they'll go around town, stopping people on the street or going into businesses or restaurants and trying to teach other people the word or phrase of the week. And they record it and put it on the mayor's Facebook page. And this has been incredibly successful because the mayor has thousands of Facebook followers. And so all these different people are now learning a new word or phrase of the week. And we like to just take that to all of our patrons as well. Libraries are also providing opportunities to share traditional knowledge between Indigenous peoples and the rest of the community. They're doing it in various ways. In West Vancouver, there's an Indigenous plant walk that's very, very popular. They also have spaces for displaying traditional art forms and skills, and with interpretive materials. Vancouver Island Regional has a whole series called Indigenous Voices, which is wonderful. And this is just one example or two examples here. They have in various communities that they serve, elders will come and share a skill or some knowledge that they have with the public. Up in the upper left corner of this slide, you see this person took people on a plant walk, teaching them about the traditional uses of the plants in the area. And in the lower right-hand corner, this woman taught traditional beading, button blanket making to the public in Nanaimo. And they have a whole series. Vancouver Island Regional is really doing a lot. I have to say, there are so many libraries doing things. And some of the bigger systems, when you see how many branches they have and how that translates into the number of opportunities for people to learn about Indigenous arts and culture and history and language. It's just staggering the number of initiatives that are happening across the province. And going back to Seashelt and the Siyaya movement, this is the Seashelt Public Library approached the Siyaya movement organizers and let them know that they're very much interested in providing a space for people to come together in the spirit of the movement. And one of the projects that they provided space for was weaving together. So this is Shy Waters, is a traditional weaver, and she was working on a piece meant to symbolize reconciliation, and this piece was installed in the library for some weeks, and the public was invited to come by and ask questions and watch and learn how to weave and participate in weaving this piece that symbolizes the community coming together. Now, Valemount's interesting because Valemount's a little town that does not actually have a large visible Indigenous community anywhere near them. So they don't have any formal Indigenous organizations operating there to partner with. But even in Valemount, they've been able to do some things to share culture and knowledge with with the residents. So they brought in the author and storyteller um, David Bouchard, and with some funding partners, the library put together a community potluck picnic. They had a teepee out in the park. They invited everyone to come with a blanket and eat together. And that was followed by traditional stories and traditional music with David Bouchard, and it was a very popular event. Valemount has also put together, they got a grant to put together a story kit with books and puppets that go with Indigenous animal themed stories. And they also put together a survey to find out what Aboriginal members of the community would like to see offered, where their interests are, and they were they were trying to get help in creating meaningful and welcoming programming through the results of that survey. This is a community war canoe project is a really neat thing that was happening in and around the Smithers area with the Wet'suwet'en and Gitscan leader Mel Basil. He's a traditional storyteller, and he and Guy's daughter Serenity were all the keepers of this beautiful war canoe. And they wanted to put together a project around the canoe that everyone could participate. Everyone in the community could feel that they were a part of this canoe when it was being used. And so they brought the canoe to various locations around the Bulkley Valley, and then they would put out a notice and say, look, everyone come down and help paint the canoe. And we were very fortunate to have it show up a few times on the library's front lawn. Um, and anyone who was passing by, whether they were just coming to use the library, walking down the street, whether they were tourists or a class of kids, as you can see on the right, um, anyone was welcome to come by and help paint in the designs that have been traced onto this canoe by a traditional artist. And as they participated, Mel would tell them the symbolism behind the art, and Guy would tell them stories and legends of the Wet'suwet'en people that had to do with the figures on the canoe. And it was one of the most exciting ways that I've seen people learn at the library. We're used to people coming to the library to learn, and I think seeing all these people just happening upon and something that they can actively take part in creating while learning about culture from other people talking to them. This is one of the most dynamic learning experiences that I've seen in the library, and I find it terribly exciting. And this is my goal, is for the library, is to have a lot more of these sorts of incredibly interactive learning experiences around culture. Okay, so like most libraries, we also have a summer reading club. Um, and a few years ago, we noticed that we have really high registration for a summer reading club, which is for children ages 3 to 12. We have about 100, say 160 kids. But on average, we were only getting about 4 Indigenous children enrolling. And that does not reflect the percentage of the population that we serve. So we were definitely, for various reasons, it was clear that we were not being successful for those families. We were not being relevant or accessible, or maybe we weren't reaching them, but something was not happening that needed to be happening. And so one of the ways we decided to try to improve upon that was we created a new position that was specifically for an Indigenous summer student. And we had a couple of goals for this position. One was our workforce at that time did not accurately reflect the population that we served. We had no Indigenous employees. Um, and so we wanted to be proactive about that. And we also wanted to make sure that we were able to get feedback from the Indigenous community on what they would like to see and on any barriers that we might not be aware of, that might be a reason why children were not accessing this free summer program, which we feel is very valuable, and we really wanted everyone to be able to enjoy it. So we, for the last 3 years, we've hired 2 summer students to run the program, and one of those positions is only open to Indigenous students. And part of their job is to enrich the program with elements of Indigenous culture, also to go out and do community outreach to Indigenous community members and get their feedback, let them know about the program, and ask them, what do you want to see and what doesn't work for you? And it has been going quite well. We have seen a little bit more participation by Indigenous families, not as much as we would like. So we're hoping that we will learn each year and do a better job, and that will grow over time. But one thing we didn't anticipate, that is probably the most important outcome of this initiative, is that all of the children in the program, so 160 kids, and say 155 of them on average are settlers, are all learning about Wet'suwet'en culture. So this this is reconciliation in action. And even though we have not yet reached our original goal for this program, this side effect is actually one of the most important things that we've done. And so now we're very pleased that all of the kids are leaving the summer reading club with knowledge of the territory and the local clans and the houses and the crests and the language, and they've heard a few local stories, and we're having local Indigenous speakers come in and teach them different things, or give or do oral storytelling, and it is a much richer program for everyone now. One more fun thing that we did with this program is every year we have a campfire cookout and sing along for the whole community down in Riverside Park. And one year, the Indigenous summer student learned how to sing head and shoulders, knees and toes in Wet'suwet'en, and we were able to teach that to all of the kids there. So that was a lot of fun. Okay, how are we doing for time here? 36. So we also, libraries are also bringing in Indigenous authors to make sure that their patrons are aware of them and that their fans get to enjoy them, and just putting that budget line towards greater representation for Indigenous authors. So we are fortunate to have Richard Wagamies, Janet Rogers, Jennifer Skin Wickham, Roy Henry Vickers, and Richard Van Camp, and other libraries are doing that as well. I actually have so many lists of people that have been coming into different libraries that I'm going to wait until I get on to specific libraries to list them all, because there are just so many. And they've also created curated lists or pathfinders where they're drawing their materials by and about Indigenous peoples and topics to the public's attention and making them easier to find. They're running book clubs with where people are reading Indigenous authors, fiction and nonfiction, and discussing them and learning more about truth and reconciliation that way. And of course, the materials that we're bringing in were, I know that here in Smithers and in some of the other libraries I've spoken to, we're dedicating an ever increasing percentage of our budget to making sure that we do get materials by and about Indigenous peoples and cultures. We always had them, but that is growing significantly and consciously. So National Indigenous Peoples Day is another way that libraries have been supporting sharing culture in their communities and partnering with the local nations. Um, there have been films shown, NFB films, as one way to celebrate Aboriginal Day. Another way is to go to a community celebration and have a table, or to sponsor an oral storyteller. Our library did something really unusual for us. We were invited to do face painting for children by the local friendship center at our celebration. And we thought, okay, well, we've never done face painting. That isn't really what libraries do, but if that's what they need to support this event, that's what they say they want, then we'll do that to support the event. And what happened is, when a whole bunch of classroom teachers heard that the library would be at that event, they brought all their classrooms. So even though we weren't doing what we usually do as a library, it made for a very successful Indigenous Day event and drew a much higher number of people than normally come, who all spent the day learning about Wet'suwet'en culture. So our goal of sharing culture was met, even though it was in a way that we aren't used to doing it. And as a result, that was so successful that now we do that every year. Hey, some of the other things that libraries are doing, there are various libraries that have done so much that I would just like to take a moment to read some of the things that they have been working on. So I'll just pause and tell you a bit about the Greater Victoria Public Library, because it's truly incredible. They have been working on deepening their connections with Indigenous communities and working towards truth and reconciliation through their collection services and programming for the last 10 years. So they've done an incredible amount. So in 2017, they worked with the Indigenous community to begin a journey of reconciliation. They reviewed the reports on the TRC website and ensured they had print copies, plus catalog records with links to the reports available in digital form. They enhanced their collection by creating a variety of kits for adults and children that feature Indigenous writers and artists and address truth and reconciliation. Through a partnership with the Victoria Native Friendship Centre Library, they offered the 4-part speaker series Reconciliation, Opening the Door to Conversations, which reached almost 650 people, many of whom reported a shift in thinking as a result of this engagement. Comments included, "I was deeply impacted by this experiential workshop. I learned more in 3 hours than any number of books, interviews, and articles I've read. It was incredibly profound. And this was an exceptionally moving experience. As a result, I have begun to reach out across the bridge." GVPL continues to develop relationships with local Indigenous people through initiatives such as a traditional story time presented by Surrounded by Cedar and by Family Services. Together, they offer a monthly program that is culturally appropriate for Indigenous families who are clients of Surrounded by Cedar, and also welcoming to all families in the community. The program includes drumming, storytellers, snacks, crafts, a keepsake book for every child, and a whole lot of conversation. In 2018, they offered traditional Indigenous story time for families, Indigenous Stories Book Club with Carmen Rodriguez de France, an assistant professor of Indigenous education at UVic. And this was a book club focused on the works of Indigenous peoples. They also offered a workshop, Indigenous Ways of Being Through Photography, which was about paying attention to immediate surroundings such as land, imagery, cultural representations, and language through the lens of a camera. And they had a workshop on Introduction to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 Calls to Action. This was the second year of this workshop. They also had Victoria Councillor Mariana Alto speak about the City of Victoria's Witness Reconciliation Program, in which the city is making the culture, history, and modern reality of local Indigenous peoples from the Songhees and Esquimalt nations become present and apparent throughout Victoria. And they've created kits for adults and children featuring stories and information by Indigenous creators. They have lots of collaborations with Indigenous communities, monthly visits to Siwot Nation's House of Learning, monthly visits to Songhees Nation's Kwumkwumleelum After School Program, monthly visits to the Esquimalt Nation's Family Storytime and Baby Time, twice annual participation at the Back to School Picnic at Government House, a monthly visit to the Victoria Native Friendship Center parent drop-in for family story time, and a Digilab outreach to the Friendship Center and Songhees youth programs. So that is what the Greater Victoria Public Library has been up to. Pretty busy. Okay, now more from Vancouver Island, the Courtenay branch of VRL runs the Connect program for homeless community members. And some of the Indigenous program attendees mentioned that they would like to learn more about their culture. So VRL partnered with the Aboriginal outreach worker from a local transition house in Courtenay, and that worker comes to teach language, drumming, and other aspects of their culture at the Connect program. With the Vancouver Public Library, they have an Indigenous storyteller and residence program that was created in 2008 in recognition of Indigenous peoples in Canada and the importance of oral storytelling as a way to learn about and from Indigenous communities in Vancouver. And the Hazelton Public Libraries, our neighbors down the road here, it's a tiny community, but during the annual Pioneer Days celebration, the library hosted an outdoor event where community members took turns reading the 94 calls to action. And the library keeps free undripped pamphlets on their front desk. And so far, that little library has gone through more than 1,000 copies. So that's a lot of information going out from a tiny little village. Okay, on to the slide, policies and practices. There are a lot of different ways that libraries are supporting reconciliation, and I'm getting close to the end here, so I'm just going to cover these briefly. They are creating new subject headings. This is true also of university libraries. For instance, the Ryerson University Library and the University of Alberta libraries are both trying to decolonize their description and cataloging. And they are looking for new subject headings and really scrutinizing the colonization that's inherent in the way that things are described and classified and labeled. And so they're coming up with new ways of doing that. Also relocating items. For example, some libraries are moving items on Indian residential schools from the 300s in the Dewey Decimal System to the 971s, recognizing that it wasn't really education, it was more a chapter in Canada's history. And then another interesting question comes up around where to shelve Indigenous creation stories. And this has already been a bit contentious when it comes to Bible stories. Some libraries, there are all different ways that libraries like to arrange Bible stories, mythology, fairy tales, and there are some interesting conversations going on around, well, do all of these things belong together? What is the most respectful way to categorize them, but then again, also what is the most effective way to make them discoverable? Because if we put some things where they belong, they might not get the prominence that they deserve. They might not get found by people. So people are they're still trying to figure that out. There are a few different ways that people are doing that, and that's interesting to hear those discussions. Some libraries, such as ours, have developed employment equity policies to diversify their workforce. For example, our policy says that if we have two equally qualified candidates for a position, that preference may be given to the Indigenous candidate, and that is to be proactive in trying to rectify a historical imbalance in our workforce, and creating new positions to reflect the community and educate the public. I know some libraries have Indigenous community outreach librarians. And there's lots of staff training going on. There are workshops such as the Kairos blanket exercise, and the West Vancouver Memorial Library and Seashelt have both participated in that. Reconciliation Canada will come and do facilitated dialogues. I know that some of our staff were fortunate to participate in that in a municipal workshop. There are MOOCs, massive open online courses, available for free online, such as Indigenous Canada, and the Whistler Public Library is actually taking that to their patron base by which is really neat for sparking discussion. They're meeting once a week in the Squamish Lillooet Cultural Center for the 1 hour lecture that's a part of this online course, followed by a discussion among themselves, which is just a terrific idea to get people talking and sharing their reflections. And the University of British Columbia is offering the Reconciliation Through Indigenous Education MOOC through the edX online platform for free. Here's just a list of partnerships, some of the partners that libraries have worked with in trying to bring programs and events and collection materials, or even just input and feedback to influence their work and inform their work. And these are some of the resources that I was fortunate to use to get all of this information. So a big shout out and thanks to the Association of BC Public Library Directors. I got almost all of this information from their listservs. People were so helpful in sharing everything that they've done, and also through the BCLA First Nations Interest Group listserv. Thank you so much for telling me about your work. There is probably some that I didn't get to. If you could see my desk, I've got about 25 pieces of paper here covered in in things that people have sent me, and I'm just so delighted to see how much that's going on and in BC. And if you'd like to know more about the Smithers Library's large community event, there are two online resources. The links are here on the slide. We did an ALA webinar, a 1 hour webinar that can be found at that link, and we also have a program model written up, which is on that link. So I'd like to say thank you, Wet'suwet'en, Snekalia, and Nenyu Hostin. I will see you again. And now I'd love to hear your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy. It's really great to hear the wonderful things that are happening around the province. And thanks just again for highlighting some of the work that you're doing and other libraries around the province are doing. I hope the participants who are with us today were able to are inspired to take some action in their own organizations. You gave some great examples of things, small things that people can start to embark on, as well as the big 10-year project examples. It all does take time. So we welcome any questions. So please do send us your questions in the chat.
Sorry, Anissa, I should have given you a heads up there.
That's okay. So yeah, again, I just had a question for you, Wendy, if you don't mind, while we wait for others to maybe
Yes,
type in their
certainly.
questions. Could you just give us like a few guiding principles for engagement, especially when you are working with so many partners, like the first activity or the first event you described, it sounded like there were a dozen partners that you were working with.
Yes, yes.
Give us some
We
tips
ended
and
up with
guiding principles.
we ended up with 15 community partners in that one. That was just an incredible experience. Um, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is I have to mention my colleague Melissa Sawatsky here, the program and event coordinator. She and I both worked on that together. It was very much the two of us and on the library end, and we both dedicated ourselves to that for a year and a half. And we used to say to each other that it was a complete paradigm shift. So prepare prepare to be changed if you undertake a project like that. Start with an open mind. Know that some parts of it are going to be really really uncomfortable, and very hard to listen to, very sad, and that any real positive change and growth and forward movement is not going to happen without going through that. Um, so basically, we knew when we were talking about taking this project on before we started contacting anyone else and asking if they would participate. We had a discussion with each other and saying, this is going to be really hard. We're going to make a lot of mistakes. We're going to make some faux pas. We don't know all the protocols because I'm not Wet'suwet'en, neither is she. We're not Indigenous. And we knew very, very little about Indigenous culture and history. We wanted to learn and we wanted to help our communities learn. But we had to be willing to make mistakes, and we had to realize that that was going to happen and still know that it was important enough to try to do it anyway. Um, so it was an extremely emotional experience for both of us, and you'll see in the ALA webinar about that program, there's a slide that says "Caution: Paradigm Shift Ahead," and and it's absolutely true. It took so long to build the relationships that we needed in order for people to participate. And almost all of that time that we spent was just spent listening to people. Um, People were not willing, most people were not willing to say, yes, I will come and speak at your event and share my perspective or share my stories or share my culture until they felt that we knew where they were coming from and what to expect. And the only way to do that was to spend time with them and listen to them. So it was we're really humbled to have such a great privilege to spend so much time with people just sitting over a coffee and listening to them talk about their people's experiences and their community's experiences and their own experiences. So you can't approach these like most other events. I mean, yeah, I was put together an event yesterday. I said, oh, you want to talk about this? Okay, here's a date. Does that work for you? There's a time. We'll put a poster together in 2 weeks. Send me a headshot and a bio, and we'll put out tea and cookies. There, you're done. this this doesn't work that way. You can't do it without building relationships, and you will be transformed through the process of putting an event like that together. And if it's done as we hope, then everyone who attends it will be transformed as well.
Thank you for that, Wendy. That's amazing. I have not seen any other messages, comments, or questions come in through the chat. So I think we will just go ahead and close out now. We are just a little bit before 1 o'clock anyway, so I think we're in good time. And again, thank you very much, Wendy, for sharing your knowledge and your experiences and your ideas with us.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. So just to wrap things up here, join us in 2019. I can't believe I'm saying that. It doesn't seem like that's even possible, but we are at the end of the year. There will not be a webinar, or there is not a webinar scheduled for December, but mark your calendar for the next webinar coming up in January, on January 9th, which will be presented by Mary Forbes of the Potato House Sustainable Community Society in Williams Lake. And she'll be talking about her youth engagement strategies, tips and tricks that they've used in her organization. Remember, if you do have suggestions for topics in the future, or if you wish to present one for yourself, please email us and let us know where your interest is, what knowledge you want to share, and we'll get you scheduled next year as well. There will be a survey sent to each of you to solicit your feedback about this webinar, and there will also be a space to put in other topics for us to consider in next year. So please pay attention to your inbox and complete that survey. And I think, let's see if I get, there we go. And just another little plug here, join us in 2019 and beyond, and feel free to become a member of the BC Museums Association, where you will have free webinar participation for the rest of the year. There's our website address is down there at the bottom, so you can check out that web page for more information and information on how to become a member of the BC Museums Association. And lastly, I just do want to say that we have been recording this webinar. I apologize, I forgot to do it right away, but I caught myself about the second slide into Wendy's presentation, and the recording will be archived on our website as well. So any of you who are registered for this webinar and participating today will get the link to that archived webinar and the password to access it. So again, thank you all very much. Thank you, Wendy, and we hope to see you online next time. Bye-bye, everybody.